So, Stage 8 takes place in a sort of factory-ish place. Don't know what exactly they're manufacturing here.
Balloons. Daniel, did you have anything to say on this level?
Compared to the earlier levels, it's a lot more narrow and there's a lot more sort of specific challenges. And yeah, it's more narrow, it's more restricted, and so that requires a more efficient use of the player's movement and things like the momentum and pushing back against the momentum and better control overall, which is why I think in this level, more than any of the others, those higher level, more minute tactics come into play because it's asking so much of the player.
The first level element you see are these sort of oil drum looking things spewing fire out that increase into a tall tower that's about 6 tiles high. The way that they introduce this is that they have it to the left of the screen so you can see it as it slowly rises up, but then you see the one immediately following it afterwards. So if you sort of just stand more towards that right side of the screen, you'll find yourself sandwiched between two of those towers. When what you really need to do is be moving forward and moving ahead of them. Past those oil drum fires up top, you see these spinning turbines. That's what I'm just going to be calling them from now on. And you also see conveyors. Each of these are all new elements specific to this final level. Past that though, you run into one of several in this stage actually where you need to let go of your balloons and do some normal platforming, where you have to drop down on the right and then jump over the gap. Or if you think you're quick enough, you can get at least one balloon out, safely float over the gap, and then take them off and get through to the other side. Something to note is that Balloon Kid, even when you have the balloons off, you're still very bouncy, so one of the things that makes this jump trickier compared to most other platform games is if you jump against the wall, you don't sort of just stick to it and float directly down, you actually just bounce off it as if you were made of rubber.
That's an interesting bit of consistency, though, that you bounce against stuff when you're flying, so you just always bounce against stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't the balloons, it was Alice all along. Once you get past that first major section and come up the up elevator, which hopefully you're preparing your next set of balloons, this next section you see a large conveyor belt that doesn't go anywhere except into a pit of fire. I'm guessing that's fire. What are they making this factory again? I don't know, who cares? Balloons. So you see the same spinning turbines, except this time they're moving on belts. And you can actually see the path they're about to go on, so that's neat. So what you have to do, and this is the other advanced challenge, and it's only going to get harder from here on out, is you have to gently float almost in a straight line, because that's how you get the balloons that are actually set up there. So you're neither too low to be set on fire to fall into the pit, but not too high that you accidentally pop your balloon on that turbine that's moving left and right either. Another thing you'll see is a mix of hazards that are moving left and right and up and down.
The turbines are stuck on a track, and so, those birds in the first level, they're either stationary and go off screen at a regular pace, or they move towards you and they go off screen even faster. Whereas these things can bob back and forth into the back of the stage and back into the front of the stage, which makes them especially tricky to get around. Also, a technical note is that you can stand on the turbine, and it's like a tiny one-tile conveyor belt.
Yeah. So the turbines, they're actually like other enemies in the game where they're harmless, but they will still pop your balloons. After you get through that section, you have to actually do quite a tricky jump here. You'll notice that there's a tiny hallway that you can't fit in through your balloons, so you need to land on the conveyor belt and then make a running jump inside there.
I feel for this area, it wasn't communicated very clearly how you actually make it through that gap, because originally, in my perception, was that you would have to let go of your balloons and fall in. Or even, because of the 4 spikes just above that gap, I thought you'd have to purposely pop your balloons and then land in.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah, and I suppose on the way the balloons are organized, it does kind of suggest jumping, like jumping into the 2 stack on balloons and then through the gap. But initially that wasn't clear to me.
Yeah, that happens in Stage 6 too. Stage 6 is where that first happened to me. I sort of figured out because I kind of learned my lesson in Balloon Kid that in these later levels, they're going to want to have more things that involve a sequence of moves, but they need to actually scroll the screen far enough so you can actually see what you're supposed to do. And sometimes if you're already hanging out on the left trying to keep going, then you're not gonna have enough time to actually get through it, or you'll misinterpret the challenge. So once you exit the narrow corridor, you have to avoid 2 different crushing pistons. I don't remember if they can actually crush you if your balloons are out, but they still pop your balloons. So going through that platform with the 2 pistons, should both your balloons be popped, there's actually a moving platform above the fire pit, right past it, that you can land on and regain your balloons. So you can make your way past the next piston. But you're going to have to watch out because this is another example of traps that can kill you off screen. If you decide, oh, I'm on a conveyor belt, I'm safe, I'm just going to refill my balloons right now. Nope, don't do that because you're going to have a bad day. Because there's a fire in the middle of the conveyor belt. So you can actually, if you still have a balloon, you can float over it, or you can just jump over it with no balloons. Then you make it to the next section where there's another narrow hallway. After that, there's these 3 fires, and you have to basically wait for all of them to come on stage to understand, okay, what does the game want me to do? Oh, it wants me to jump over 3 fires.
Feels like a very deliberate decision to limit your jumping area so that you wouldn't have enough time to fill a balloon. Because, yeah, I tried it 2 or 3 times and I couldn't do it,
Yeah.
so it's quite tight in that way.
Yeah, I think this is how I recognize it, is that when you see that small corridor, and probably because I think I did get burned by that first fire, I'm thinking, okay, conveyor belts have dangerous things on them. I'm just going to stay here, wait for the game to show me what's up before the camera naturally starts to push me away from my safe area, and then deal with what comes ahead. And that's when I said, oh, there's 3 fires, jump over all 3 of them, and then keep going. This next section, I would always go down the bottom, and what happens with these hazards is that they kind of act like that one plant in Super Mario World that spits out these 4 fireballs that sort of just float down.
The lava lotus.
Yeah, the lava lotus. So it has that sort of attack pattern. And it acts the same way as the spikes do, where once you move a certain distance within them on the X position, that's when you trigger them to fire. So at the same time as you're dealing with those lava lotuses, there's actually a fire enemy that's jumping where the fire pit is. And that's actually kind of a tricky setup. Most enemies usually move in straight lines. That's one of the few that actually jumps. So that's where you also want to actually move in front of them. Don't wait for them to jump, otherwise you're going to make the challenge harder by having the game test you. How well are you able to float yourself in a gap while avoiding the lava lotuses, which, because they shoot 4 projectiles around it, means you also have to control your horizontal position.
I'm quite curious about what you say, Adrian, about the 2 different paths, because I naturally assume that the top path was always the more challenging path, just by virtue of the fact that you've got the sparks that are being spat out, they go up first, and so that would limit the space in between the spikes and the whatever you call those things, on the bins, and also just on the fact that generally the balloons tend to highlight the best course.
The spikes being spat out is what makes the top path easier, because you'll just bounce off them harmlessly.
Oh yeah, that's right, that's right.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's fine.
So they'll just bump you around. You just gotta make sure they don't touch your balloon. So past the lava lotuses, I'm gonna keep calling that, you have a new setup. A lot of new level elements in this last level. Of these spiked up and down platforms mixed with these grabby hands. I've never found out what the grabby hands did. I always just moved past them and moved on top of the platforms. So the deal with these up and down spike platforms is you have to maneuver yourself horizontally so that you can go straight up, then on top of the moving platform. Even if you want to stay afloat in the air, because of how fast it moves up, it's likely going to push you up, and it's going to take you very close to the spikes near up top.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise that they don't actually put you in the spikes.
Yeah, no, they take you like just close enough to where you can't actually jump anymore. You have to wait for it to go back down. I've never tried staying underneath them. That would be definitely a different challenge. So past the grabby hands mixed with the spike platforms, we now have these weird fan light bulb things. I don't know what they are, but what happens is if you pop them, they just shoot lightning at you. And as we already know, sparks are the most dangerous thing in all of Balloon Kid. They touch you, you die. They touch your balloon, you die. They're insta-kill. Oh yeah, this fire guy jumps way higher than that other one. This is an even bigger example of what I mean about having an enemy who, because he's jumping and moving up and down in 2D, is going to make things a lot harder for you if you don't try to sneak through the gap that he leaves open when he's on the ground versus when he's jumping in the air. And the thing is, because of the way this screen scrolls, he's actually going to be tagging along with you as you move through the section with the light bulbs to the sparks. You're trying to float between two sets of these moving sparks. In addition to that, there's another one where there's like 4 moving up and down. So the lanes that you can safely move through are opening and closing, which goes back to the main thing I said up towards the beginning about not just hanging towards the back of the screen, but to where you only need to worry more about controlling yourself vertically, you also need to worry about controlling yourself horizontally too. And that's when you really feel the challenge of controlling your aerial momentum. Yeah, it's easily the hardest section in the game.
I think it really comes to a head in that area just before the raised wall, because I think the timing of the 2 sets of 3 sparks that are moving horizontally back and forth, but the way that they're timed, you do have to float between them. If you get in early, you can avoid them, but if you don't get in early, then you really have to float on the 2 of them. But there's also the fact that as you're moving up, you've got that 3rd set of spikes that move across, and so as that comes into your camera view, you then have to quickly factor in the timing of that as well. So there's a lot of timing that you have to calculate, and sometimes some of those visual elements are off screen.
Yeah, that's also one of the toughest things to deal with. So once you see those sparks for the first time, especially those near the top, you need to recognize when you see the ground that, oh, you can't actually fit through there. So you need to land on the ground, let go of your balloons, and then move through. And if you miss that opportunity the first time, you actually have to dip under the sparks, wait for them to go past you, then go up and then go through down that passage. To me, I say that's easily the hardest part of the level. This next area isn't quite as tricky.
Once you get on top of the platform that goes up, that gap between the first conveyor and the ceiling is narrow enough that you can't actually get through with the balloons.
So once you get a balloon, you can obviously go above the spike platform. After that, you're going to have 2 horizontally moving spike platforms above 2 fire pillar oil drum things again. You want to float in between them, and at the same time float under the up and down moving spike platform. then you're gonna have to deal with the final boss.
Yeah, so how does the final boss work?
So, the final boss is a little robot dude. When he pops his head up, he shoots 4 sparks. Yes, those sparks, the very lethal kind that you don't want your balloons to touch. Because rubber balloons conduct electricity. Don't ask me how that works. He shoots them in 4 sparks, 2 high and 2 diagonal, so you want to get into the upper diagonal spot. Although it turns out you can also just stand on the ground straight in front of him and he'll miss. The trickiest part of the fight, though, as I'm watching Greg here, is watching out for the sparks because they do rebound off the camera and off the floor and ceiling.
Yeah, I find that hitting the boss before the sparks rebound too much is important because when the sparks rebound, their path is more difficult to follow. So when you hit him, all the sparks despawn and then everything's cleaned up.
Yeah, it's certainly different from the other challenges throughout the game in that there's few diagonal enemies. I suppose, earlier on with the lightning bulb sparks, a bit earlier on, they can attack diagonally. You've got the sparks that are spat out of the oil drums. They kind of have a falling motion, but generally enemies move either in very predictable patterns or very straight lines. And in here, straight lines, but there's the bouncing, which makes them less predictable, and there's many of them all at once.
Yeah, the challenge is also much more dynamic just because the boss moves relative to you. Where you are and where he is, depending, where he is relative to the screen, determines where and how they're going to bounce and how much open space there will be in between the 4 sparks for you to move through. The further away he is, obviously the wider that gap is. But what that means is, there's more for you to run in order to jump on top of him. And unlike other bosses, this one actually moves around more while he's vulnerable for you to jump on him. Of course, his hitbox is still pretty lenient, so even if you kind of bounce him on the side of the face, not directly on top, it'll still count.
He also gets some pretty zany music.
Yeah, and unlike other bosses, he takes 5 hits instead of 3.
So, for this boss, did everyone just wait in the corner and then wait till the first set of sparks were sort of out near the walls, use that open space? When he was close, jumped him on the head, and then retreated and then repeated that cheat tactic? Is that how everyone else won?
I did that at first, but then when I found out, it was a cheap tactic to sort of just, stand in front of him as he shoots the sparks over your head, I thought, nah, I'm gonna play his game and actually try avoiding him while on my balloons.
So you actually used balloons?
Yep.
Damn.
I used my balloons after I realized that, wait, there's a way you can cheese this boss by just standing on the ground and then jumping on him once the sparks are out of the way.
Well, there goes my credibility.
Well, you do have to shed your balloons before you go in, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's just to complete the fiction of that, you're in a separate room, although there is that lower gap, but it does distinctively separate the boss battle from the previous challenges.